Welcome to this bonus lesson. I'm here with my good friend Patrick Lee. If you watched the other lesson that we recorded, you already know him. But for those of you who are watching this video for the first time, Patrick is a serial entrepreneur. He's started 6 companies, and I think you're going to talk about those companies a little bit.
A little bit.
Yeah, and I mean, the most famous one is Rotten Tomatoes. He was a founder and CEO of Rotten Tomatoes, and the #1 movie review site. And today I asked him to come and record a lesson about a question that I get from entrepreneurs all the time, which is, should I raise money for my business idea? And actually, the question that I get even more often than that is, how should I raise money for my business idea? And then I tell people, I have 2 answers for you. One, do you know that, are you sure that you want to raise money for your business idea, which is something that we're going to talk about? Because it is not given that you should raise money for any business idea. You have to understand why you're raising money for your business idea. It's not actually the right answer for a lot of situations. And the second thing that I tell them is actually the key to successfully raising money for a business idea, if you understand why you're raising it, is to not focus on raising money. It's actually to focus on getting traction. And it's misplaced attention. That's what I call it. So people, instead of focusing on getting to traction, and are you going to define traction today? Is it part of it? Okay, yeah, good. So if you focus on getting traction for your business idea, money will almost pour from the sky. But a lot of people, instead of focusing on their core business and their core product, they focus on fundraising instead. And that is the wrong strategy. So I'm gonna let Patrick walk you guys through his thoughts on this. And let me just say this before we cut to his lesson. Patrick is uniquely qualified in my book to talk about this subject because he's started 6 companies, and 5 of them he raised little or no money. Some of them bootstrapped, right? Rotten Tomato, he basically raised very little money, right? And it's like, the #1 site. Everybody's like, I think it has a huge brand awareness. Anybody who watches movies knows Rotten Tomatoes, basically. And he did it with very little money. And 5 companies he started that way. And for the 6th one, which is his current one, he raised $4.something million. So 5 bootstrapped, 1 heavily VC funded. So he's seen both sides of the equation. So I feel like you don't see that story very often. You either see entrepreneurs that have raised a lot of money for every business venture, or you see entrepreneurs that are totally disconnected and they don't raise money and they just bootstrap everything. A lot of small business owners are like that. And you probably know some of them. And you never hear both sides of the story. So I think from that perspective, he's uniquely qualified to actually talk about it and tell you guys basically the pros and cons and why you should do either one of those, consider either one of those.
Today my talk is targeted to first-time entrepreneurs looking to raise funding. So quick background on myself, I attended UC Berkeley. I've done 6 different startups, the most well-known of which is Rotten Tomatoes, and currently I'm working on a mobile game company called Hobo Labs. So as far as fundraising goes, I've done the whole spectrum. Like, my first company was selling computer systems components, just self-funded. The second one was a design firm doing a lot of work for the entertainment industry, and we had a $30,000 loan from family. Rotten Tomatoes, we raised $1 million from angels and 1 small VC. I did a company in China called XM Fish, where we raised $1.3 million from friends and family. Then I did a social network in Hong Kong called Alive Not Dead, raised a little over $500K from strategic angels. And then currently Hobo Labs raised $4.6 million from 2 VCs and strategic angels. So if you're thinking about trying to go and raise money with just a random idea prototype, my advice is stop. don't bother trying to raise money. So why not? Basically, fundraising is a full-time job, and it usually is going to take you about 3 to 6 months, most likely, to try and raise money. And that time spent fundraising, you're not working on building traction. So 99% of the people you talk to when you just have an idea or prototype, they're going to say no. And what happens after you just hear everyone say no, 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 over and over and over? You get demoralized and quit. Even if you don't quit, because you've just been spending all that time fundraising and not actually working on growing your site or your company, you have flat growth, and that makes it pretty much impossible to raise money. So what should you do instead? So basically 2 steps. The first step is to bootstrap. And the goal of bootstrapping is to keep your costs as low as possible. So how can you do that? Well, 1, don't take salary, or take the absolute minimum you need to survive, or possibly have a job and work on your idea on nights and weekends. But if you do that, you have to actually make sure you really set aside time to work on it. Don't get an office. Don't worry about legal, finance, patents, any of that stuff. If the idea doesn't work, then there's no point in doing all those things. You can always cut costs, but you can't easily grow revenue necessarily. So with Rotten Tomatoes, for instance, we were forced to bootstrap. We raised $1 million in January 2000. 2 months later, the bubble burst. We had to cut from over 20 people to 21, 17, 14, 11, and finally down to 7, just to survive. Not only that, of the 7, everyone took at least a 30% pay cut. 2 of us, myself and one of my marketing people, Paul, actually went to 0 salary. And for 6 months, I actually slept under my desk just to keep the lights on. Another way that you can kind of cut costs is get technical. So if you have a technical background and can code yourself, like, makes things way easier. Otherwise, what normally happens is you're going to have to hire a contractor to build it for you, and that wastes a lot of time and money. If you can't do it yourself, then you either need to learn or try to find a technical co-founder. But when you just have an idea or prototype, that's actually really hard to do, to get a technical co-founder. So if you don't have someone off the top of your head, I would say it's actually as hard as fundraising. The other thing is keep it simple. So you've all heard of minimum viable product. Basically do the simplest thing you can to test the idea. One example is, I believe it's a company called Idea Labs, an incubator. Way back in the day when the internet was just starting, they were trying to figure out if they could sell cars online. So what they just made a website selling cars. They didn't actually have any of the back-end system to actually have inventory of cars or anything like that. They just put it out there and see what happens. And if people bought a car, they would just go order the car and ship it to those people, even though they were probably taking a loss on every single car they sold. But they just want to see if people would actually be able to buy a car without sight unseen. Another idea would be make a mailing list for your idea, buy Facebook ads, see if people sign up. Or Kickstarter is a great way for hardware-related ones to see if there's actual demand for their idea without actually having built it. The second thing I would say is, besides bootstrapping, is focus. The goal of focusing is to keep your time as short as possible. So one way you do that is cut out the busy work. And there are many ways to be busy working on your company without actually improving traction at all. For example, answering email, researching, and I'm going to get back to researching because that's a big one, customer interviews, fundraising, working on a PowerPoint presentation, a business plan, finding office space, setting up legal finance, working on patents, etc. All of these are a waste of time. None of them are actually helping you with traction of actually seeing if your business even works. They're just busy work that's just setting things up. And getting back to research, one thing I want to say about research is, what I have found is that you pretty much shouldn't spend more than a week to research, in my opinion. What happens if you do more than a week? You commit yourself not to do it. So when I see people who are they've been researching for 3 months, I'm like, you're never going to do that thing. Why is that? Why do I believe that? Basically, any idea you have, somebody's done it probably at least 95% the same as what you're doing. And what's going to happen when you start researching is you're going to find those people who basically did your idea. And generally, they're going to fall into one of 2 camps. One, they're big. They've done really well. What's going to happen? It's going to scare you from doing it because you're like, oh, someone's already done it, and they're huge. Or the opposite. They did your idea, and it failed, and they died. And then you're going to see them, and you're going to be like, well, they just did my idea, and it didn't work. so I'm not going to do it. So some examples of companies where they did it without having to worry about so much of their competition, one would be Google. When they started, they could easily have looked at Yahoo and were like, look how big they are, we shouldn't do this. Or they could have looked at a site, which was dead at that time, and been like, oh, this doesn't work. Like, they already tried our idea and it died. Another example is Facebook. They could have looked at Friendster and be like, oh, Friendster's dead, we shouldn't do a social network. Or they could have looked at MySpace, and it's like, MySpace at that time was huge, oh, we shouldn't do it. So basically, don't spend too much time researching. If you think you have something that works, just go out and try it and see what happens. Also, as far as focus, really, traction is the only thing that matters. And in my opinion, traction for website, apps, etc., would be traffic, like how many users are using your app or coming to your website. Engagement, how long are they using your product, how often are they coming back? And revenue, how much money are you making? If even one of those three is doing well, you have traction. If two or three of them are doing well, I mean, that's great, you got a full business. The other thing I would say that's really important as far as focus is figure out the single most important metric for your business. So for example, if you're a marketplace with buyers and sellers, generally the most important metric is transactions. Like even if you have a lot of buyers and you have a lot of sellers, if they're not actually transacting with each other, then the marketplace isn't working. So once you figure out that single most important metric, spend all your time trying to get that number up. And you can set goals tied to that metric. You know, for instance, we want to have 10 transactions per day by month 1, 100 transactions per day by month 3, 1,000 transactions per day by month 6. And what's really important about traction is traction beats everything. Numbers beat all. They beat a team, they beat the idea, technology, market size, a great PowerPoint presentation, a business plan, pitch, patents, whatever. It doesn't matter. If you have traction, you're good. So fundraising. When should you fundraise? So if you focus your time, then it doesn't take that long. When you look at companies such as Y Combinator or 500 Startups that see many companies that they work with, they're 3-month programs. And they pitch at demo day, but the majority of their pitch is generally their numbers. They're like, oh, we had this week-over-week growth or month-over-month growth. So if you're focused as someone entering Y Combinator or 500 Startups, pretty much within 3 to 6 months, you should know your idea is working. And this is the same amount of time, if you remember, than it normally takes to fundraise. So instead, spend that time to figure out if the idea is working. Now, if you bootstrap, you don't need that much money. So assume 6 months. 6 months of rent, say $3,000 a month, which is actually a lot. Like if you bum on someone's couch, you can do it for a lot cheaper. 6 months of food, say $10 a day, $1,800. 6 months of rent, $3,000 a month, $18,000. So about $20,000, you should be able to fully test your idea. So if you can show strong growth, then you can fundraise. If your growth is flat or declining, then you might want to try pivoting to a different idea. So how to fundraise? Like I'm not going into a ton of details, but one, develop your network. And I talked about that last time. But basically, build your network first before you need to raise money. Don't ask for money the first time you meet someone. Get advice instead. Develop a relationship. And once you have traction, then go to your network that you've already built up. The second is time your attack. Schedule your pitches close together, create a sense of urgency. And the third part is find a lead. So focus on getting, if you're raising from angels, like one angel to come as a lead. They should be the most strategic investor on that list. And it makes it a lot easier if you already have a good relationship with them. And a good lead investor will make it very easy to raise from other people. So I wanted to end with an analogy about running a startup. And that is that running a startup is a lot like poker. So poker is a game of luck and skill. Well, the luck meaning that the cards are random, and the skill is when you see like the best players win consistently over time. So when you think about startups as poker, as far as luck goes, your ideas are essentially random, and your idea is like your starting hand. As far as skill, execution still makes a huge difference. Like how should you play your hand? And so when you look at like basic poker strategy, there's a couple of different concepts. There's one called tight versus loose play. And tight, for instance, is they fold their hand often waiting for a good hand. A loose player everything looks like a good hand. There's also the concept of passive versus aggressive. So passive player would check or they'll call a bet. An aggressive player is going to bet and they're going to raise. So when you cross those two against each other, you end up with 4 different types. A tight passive player, a tight aggressive player, a loose passive player, or a loose aggressive player. An optimal play for people relatively new to poker is to be tight aggressive. And when you think about tight aggressive as far as startups, tight would be meaning test your ideas quickly and cheaply. Fold immediately if they don't work, meaning like pivot to something else. And wait until you find something that works. Wait until you get a good hand. And then on the aggressive side, once you have something that works, raise money, go big. Focus on scaling. So in summary, the things I think are really important are 1, bootstrap. Keep your costs as low as possible. 2, focus. Keep your time as short as possible. Traction is the only thing that matters. And then 3, fundraising. Wait until you have traction before trying to fundraise. That's it. Thank you.
Wow, that was a heavy talk with a lot of interesting points. Now you guys understand why I invite people like him to come and give these talks, because these are things that are not taught. I mean, even university professors, they've never experienced these things. So it's, you know, these kind of learnings are not taught anymore. So I have to like go and hunt people like him that are very unique with very unique view of the world to come and share it with you guys. So there were a lot of good points in this talk, and I'm gonna put notes on the video, so you guys are gonna see, you know, explanations of some of the terms that you've used. But I want to call out a few of the points that you brought up. For one, it was very interesting because that's actually one of the things that I say is that in this day and age, I can give me a business idea, I can really test it with less $10,000, $20,000. Like maximum $50,000. I can't think of a business idea that needs $50,000 to get to a proof point, meaning traction, what do you call it? Like meaning cost product market fit, and maybe we do a talk about that at some other time. But you know, it's so cheap in this day and age to actually try ideas that I see people that are, you know, they just have an idea and they're trying to, 1, be secretive about it, 2, go and try and raise like a couple $1 million just to test this idea. I'm like, why? You can easily test it with not that much money. A lot of times for free. Honestly, like I have tested ideas with sub $1,000. So very effectively. I mean, you set up web pages if it is an idea. You create the idea of the product. On Kickstarter, you can do it for free. I mean, you just need to shoot some videos. So I think that was a really good point. And it's interesting that your number is all kind of like in the same ballpark. And the only exception to $10,000 to $20,000, you know, ballpark, or even less, is maybe medical device companies. Mm-hmm. And even those have become a lot cheaper to test these days. A lot of these medical device companies, they now use Kickstarter. So, you know, there are a lot of opportunities to test your ideas before raising money. Now, the other thing that I really liked was your poker analogy. I mean, so now I'm gonna use this going forward. So next time somebody comes and tells me, hey, I have this business idea and I wanna raise, you know, a lot of money to just test the idea, I would be like, it's as if you're a poker player. You've not seen your hand yet and you want to go all in. And not only you want to go all in, you want to go all in with someone else's money. So, you know what I mean? You agree with that analogy? Yeah. So the other thing that is kind of, I want you to elaborate a little bit. And, you know, so Patrick and I have kind of reversed path in entrepreneurship. So Patrick started with bootstrapping, and the first 5 companies that he started were bootstrapped pretty much, except for the last one where he actually raised venture capital. I did it the other way. So the first company I started, I raised $60 million, and if you count venture debt on top of it. So $80 million I raised to start a company, and now I'm doing more bootstrapping. So it's like kind of like you went at it from one angle, I went from the other way. And I personally, there are a lot of downsides. So even if, there are obviously upsides to raising a lot of money. You can make more mistakes. But the downside is, in my opinion, a lot of times a business that could have worked without raising money and would have been a great lifestyle business, once you raise money, you take out some of those options. Do you agree with that assessment?
Yeah, for sure.
So do you want to add a little bit more color?
I think sometimes when you raise a lot of money, you end up hiring too many people. You feel like you need to spend that money,
right?
And you become a lot less efficient. You don't bootstrap, and actually you don't focus.
Right.
You start doing a lot of extra things that you never would have done if you just had a little bit of money.
Yeah. And also the other thing that is interesting is, if you start one of these companies that Patrick started, and don't raise much money, and the company doesn't, Rotten Tomatoes became big, but assume that a company becomes like small scale cash flow lifestyle business. If you raise a lot of money to start a company like that, the investors want a different exit. So basically what makes you happy is not necessarily what makes the investor happy. And that takes away a lot of options in terms of, have you seen that scenario play out?
Yeah, for other people, not for me.
Okay, can you think of one?
Not off the top of my head.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. So the way I think about it is, raising money, like we said, there's a place to raise money, there's a place not to raise money. Your number one goal is to actually, none of these things matter. The most important thing is traction. The number one goal is to reach to traction. I always say an entrepreneur's number one job is to reach traction as quickly as possible and as cheaply as possible. So it's kind of like, again, using poker analogy, it would be just like trying to assess or see the strength of your hand with as little and risk as possible. That's literally what it is. So
yeah, you just basically ante, see it, it's no good, fold.
Exactly.
Ante, see it, fold. Right? Until you get pocket aces, then you're like, okay, now start
boom.
going in.
One other point I want to add is, what he just said, which is like ante, see your hand and fold, meaning test the idea quickly, see if there's traction, and drop the idea as quickly as possible. So he brought up an interesting point, which is do not research the idea for a long time, because, and that's actually an interesting point to call out. Basically what happens is that the more time and energy you spend into an idea, the higher is your commitment to that idea. And people have commitment consistency bias. So it becomes harder and harder to actually fold the idea. And one thing that I tell people is think of each idea or business idea as like a swing in a baseball game. So you are not just one swing. You don't want to put your life on it. And you want to take your swings. And you don't want to, but you know that you're more than one swing and know that you're going to miss a lot of these. So that thinking of I'm swinging and swinging and swinging, that actually helps a lot. And I see people that are stuck in the mud with their one swing, and they kind of they have spent a lot of time. They don't pull the trigger on their idea. It's not like they're executing. They're not even executing. So they're just researching or trying to raise money. And I'm like, you're stuck in the mud. So you gotta go. You gotta test it quickly. You gotta test it cheaply. If it works, it works, then go all in. And if it doesn't, well, it doesn't. So anyways, this was a very useful talk. A lot of good points in it. So hopefully you guys benefited from it. Watch the video a couple of times. I'm gonna put the definition of the terms in the video so it makes it easier to understand and follow. Okay? Thank you.
Thanks.